Morena, welcome to this session from Treaty-Based Futures about the intersections of race, gender, class, sexuality and ableism. I'm here with Ruth Jones, Jade LeGrice, Sissy Rock and our moderator Jessica Ngatai. I'm Debbie Hager. I'm just going to be facilitating this session. Today the webinar participants are going to introduce themselves, and as they introduce themselves, they're going to talk about how they're located in relation to intersections of race, gender, class, sexuality, and ableism, and how these identities position them as the same as or differently to others. So Ruth, I'll ask you to start and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora Debbie. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, ngā mihi aroha kia koutou. Ngā pai maunga e kare puti nei ko Puke Maire, ko mana waru, ngā wai e kare punei, ko Waiapu, ko Arai Te Uru. Tēnei a Ngāti Parau, wā rongo whakaata e o whaati nei kia koutou. He tamaiti whāngai ahau. E tipu ake ahau e Jones, no o tautahi he raro o ta korowai o ngai tahu, ko no nai tahu tōku tuakana. Kia ora koutou. My name is Ruth Jones and really honoured to be here. I was just saying that I hail from the east coast of the North Island. My husband and I, my birth father lies in Tukumaru Bay. My birth mother comes from Manituke, just below Gisborne. And my birth father lies in Tiki Tiki, actually. I was thinking of Gary. But yeah, so we come from the east coast and I live in Ōtautahi in Christchurch. In terms of intersectionality, I need to say that slowly. I'm really proud to be part of the community I serve. The community I serve are people with disabilities and Māori. So, and I've done that for a long time and I've been really privileged to be in that space. So I have a disability, I am Māori. While I whakapapa to up north, I was born and grew up in Christchurch and yeah, and have used all of me, I suppose, to advocate for people and to make sure, as I see, that everybody has a Māori, the Māori being the life essence of us all, and because everyone has a Māori, everyone is equal, and that's how I proceed in this world. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Ruth. And Jade, welcome.
Oh, tēnā koutou katoa. Just want to acknowledge my fellow co-presenters and the organisers of this, and of course the people listening in the audience. Aroha to you all. Just to introduce myself, I te taha o tōku whaia, ko ngā taukimata whaurua te waka, ko hoki anga nui a kupe, te moana, ko kumaunga ka rangaranga, ko rākau tapu me whiria, ko te rarawa me ngāpuhi te iwi, ko nai tūpoto, nā te korokoro, nā te wharara, me te pauka na hapu, no motukaka me Pākanai nā marae. I te taha o tōku matua he Pākehā Devonport. So I have Māori, Croatian and English ancestors, and these are identities that are not equally privileged in our Aotearoa context and indeed in daily life. So I'm a cisgender woman. I'm privileged by gender identity, but not by gender. So a lot of my work is sort of focused on railing against systems and processes that don't cede ground to women, to Māori, that don't give women or Māori women platforms for being considered capable of making our own decisions, to agentically negotiate the contextual circumstances around them, informed by race, class, gender, sexuality and ableism. I currently enjoy the privileges of the middle class, but I did grow up working class and sometimes our whānau, our household was on the dole. And so I guess that means I do enjoy a lot of privileges economically, but I don't have the kinds of family scripts for being in the world as I am at the moment. I enjoy the privileges of heteronormativity, although I have had some same-sex sexual experiences. And on this basis, I try to be an LGBTQI ally, but acknowledge that it's an area that I don't struggle with in the same way that many of my friends do. I am able-bodied, so I do have privileges in relation to moving in a sort of ableist society, ata tinana. But I guess ate wairua me hinengaro, I can be quite sensitive to seemingly innocuous things because I live with the ongoing impacts and effects of past trauma. And that means that sometimes I'm battling floods of memories as I go about my daily life, and I'm also quite cautious to not bleed this into other contexts. And that it requires me to be very vigilant about my well-being and organisation and such things. So that's me.
Thank you, Jade. Sissy.
Morena, my name is Sissy Rock, and I identify in my paid and unpaid work as a community developer, and I identify as a cisgendered woman, a lesbian. I also I'm Pākehā, and I'm fat, and I'm over 50, and I think that these things all together mean something about how I am in the world. I've noticed more and more how easily it is to sort of dismiss the older fat woman. I was thinking about what Jade was saying, and I've had a middle class upbringing, which I think really assisted me in my times of being a single mother. I raised 3 sons by myself on the DPB, the domestic purpose benefit, and that time in my life has really formed a lot of the work and activism work that I do now. But I had parents that owned houses, and I think we all know that if you have a parent that owns a house, you're much more likely to be set up economically in the world. So I appreciate the privilege that came with that. I mean, I work largely with small not-for-profits or local government, but I also have volunteered in the past on women's centres, so both the West Auckland Women's Centre and the Auckland Women's Centre. And I'm currently the chair of the Auckland Pride Festival, and these things are all really big parts of my identity because I live in Paparoa, and while most of the time being a lesbian up here isn't a problem, we're just the girls, there are times when I look at my partner and I say to her, I think we should be a little less lesbian right now. And then there are times when I'm in the Auckland queer community where, of course, it's perfectly okay to be a lesbian, but I'm not so sure whether some of the other parts of me are so appreciated. I think being a woman, sometimes in the queer community, you still face a lot of misogyny. So that's kind of how I find myself being in the world right now.
Thank you. So the question to you all is, what are the places within these complex identities that you feel are most problematic, and why is that problematic? And then conversely, what are the places where you feel most comfortable and why? So what do those things mean to you in the world?
I started, so I'll just start again, but no, don't need to start next time. I think for me, the thing that links everything for me is whakapapa. And whakapapa gives me my strength, and my whakapapa doesn't need to come from a particular source. It doesn't need to be Māori, but it's the link to who was and who is going to be in the future. So I'm lucky that I don't know if I'm lucky. No, I think that's what ties me together. I think the problematic stuff comes when people assume things. And for me, as a disabled Māori woman, the identity people see mostly is like the scooter that I use most of the time in my wheelchair, and make assumptions around that. So it's, you know, so it's a real basic thing, I think. It's not sort of highfalutin, but I'm aware that that's the thing that that's the barrier that stops me being able to express my whakapapa. My husband and I have a whānau ora entity called Hei Whakapiki Māori, and our mantra, really, our whakatauki, is to be Māori first. While we celebrate all of who we are, I think that Māori first is so strong, because it's not when you have a disability. That's the most problematic stuff. The cool stuff is having that whakapapa that brings us back. The most problematic thing at this time, and it's real practical stuff, you know. So Gary and I both have disabilities, and we are in our bubble, and our support staff are in our bubble as well. And our bubbles need to be really tight, because if any bubble bursts, then Gary and I will end up in hospital level care. And I don't say that to be dramatic. I say that because if Gary, because our support workers will go, because they will need to self-isolate if we get anything, you know, like COVID-19, 19, yes. So, you know, that's the practicality, really. So in order to be Māori first, we need to be really okay in terms of how we are as disabled people. So there's juggling, I think, which you maybe alluded to in your email, Debbie, when we were talking about this kōrero, but there's also just getting the platelets right, really. It's like it's like the earth. To move one thing, you need to move another. And I think our world, in terms of being Māori, could be quite small if we didn't work at it all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. Who else is going to respond to that?
Oh, kia ora, Ruth. Just to sort of tautoko your kōrero around whakapapa and the importance of that, and the kind of gold and silver threads that kind of bind us together as people, as whole, in a wholeness and uniqueness in the world, and that it's our kind of divine right and privilege to be who we are, and express that in the fullness of that, not have to kind of I don't know, suppress different aspects of our identity, or have to always concede to people who have more privilege, but to actually acknowledge that that's our, we deserve the best. And that includes in relation to all of our differences and our diversities. So kia ora for that kōrero. I think it's sort of flipped the other side of that for me. I often think about sometimes a lot of the dilemmas and challenges that present themselves in my life. I think about colonialism as a kind of overarching system that a lot of these intersections encompass. So thinking about how, when I think about some of the stories I heard as a child growing up, through my mother's side, there was a lot of stories, I guess, about not trusting institutions, colonial services, I suppose, the systems, and certainly there was certainly some shared stories on my father's side, on the Pākehā side, of mistrust of certain systems and institutions and authorities. But at the same time, there were more narratives around comfort and the feeling of connection and belonging in a kind of in relation to dominant norms and values that perhaps weren't as shared in my mother's side of the whānau. So I guess within that too, I don't know that necessarily. When I think about race, gender, class, sexuality and ableism, I don't see them as discrete, sort of easily weighted categories that we can just sort of apportion out. They all kind of make an ensemble. They get sort of assembled together and within a person and the wholeness of their being. And I think that this sort of balance of relative privileges and marginalities are in flux with our surrounding context and environment, so that there are some contexts where I might be embraced as, for instance, a cisgender, hetero, flexible Māori woman at an abortion rally, speaking from a position of knowing, of knowledge. But for instance, if I take myself and move myself into a stage 1 lecture where I'm sharing my knowledge, then I get sort of backlash from some Pākehā students who don't really want to question their social privilege. That then becomes a sort of marginalising space for being me. And I guess in those contexts, I'm the same person, but the different scenarios raise unique challenges and a different set of questions about what to do and how to resolve that issue at hand.
Thank you. Sissy, do you want to comment on this?
I've just noticed someone's asked for a definition of the word intersection, and I feel nervous to be the one to do that, but I'll give it a go. I think Jade just talked about our gender, our class, our ability, disability, our sexuality. I added fatness in there because that seems important to me, and how all of these things intersect allow us to look at privilege in a more complex way, and that can shine the light on where all those intersects are, so that we can see where we need to put the most privilege, or where there needs to be more resourcing or ability to act. Does that sound okay? I'm asking my other panelists here. Yep, okay. It's a working definition. I was thinking while you were both speaking last night, my partner read out something from Facebook where a young girl had said, Mummy, are all prime ministers women, or is it just better that way? And in response to Jacinda, and I guess I thought, wow, that's quite a big change, isn't it? From this, we see all these men, usually white men, in these positions of power and making decisions on behalf of everyone, and for us to have such a strong role model, it's very liberating. I really enjoy that. But I also am aware that Jacinda is a white, cisgendered, heterosexual woman. So in terms of really looking at those intersections, she's representing a large group of people that's already quite a dominant discourse in the world. And that's how I feel sometimes. Like I feel like I'm a bit racy. I'm not that radical, but I am the sort of middle-aged, middle-class, white consultant that comes into communities and wears a neck piece and spouts some sort of theory or some sort of idea. Usually, because I'm a community developer, based on this idea that we're with people and we're empowering people, but somehow there's a disconnect for me. More and more there is a disconnect, particularly when some of the stuff that I'm talking about is under, in my own worldview, is a really Western, Pākehā idea of what community development should look like. And there are other people in the room that have their own Indigenous ideas, or these, Te Ao Māori ideas that aren't put first, front and centre, and they're not the ones that we're learning from. Instead, we've kind of got this other idea, and what we will do, this is talk about being bicultural, and we'll translate some of our ideas into te reo as if that's biculturalism and sharing the power. And this is becoming increasingly uncomfortable for me as I recognise my privilege, and I feel like I'm part of a system that is carrying on with oppressive kind of ways, or silencing people. So that's where I feel probably the most uncomfortable. Because I think that I have a lot of ability to influence then. And then I feel the most comfortable probably in really small groups, in my lounge where I am with other queer activists, and I can explore the areas where I need to update myself, because I think within the queer community, and I think gender there is a really big issue, cisgender, transgender, non-binary, feminism and how that intersects with ideas around gender in the queer community. These are really new ideas for some people, and to find the place where you can talk about them and update yourself and kind of, you know, and I've had to do this, acknowledge where some of your thinking comes from and why people are thinking differently and being differently now, does require generosity from people. And sometimes it does require the people on the margins to do all the work. And I think that that's hard as well. You know, like if I'm asking my friends to explain things to me, sometimes I think I need to go off and do that piece of work myself. So that would be how I'd answer that question.
Thank you all very much. So we thought, first of all, I just want to say to everyone that we're aware that you're sending us questions. Thank you. And Jessica is moderating those questions and will send them to me. And thanks for addressing the intersectionality question, Sissy.
Well, I'm not sure I did so well, but...
We'll also look at answering some of your questions towards the end of the session. So please keep sending them in. Jessica's collating them for us. The next thing that we thought that we'd look at is what racism, because this is an anti-racism seminar, what racism means to you in the context of your identity, or those different places of identity that you've talked about, and how that impacts on your, or informs your activism. So what does racism mean? What is it in terms of who you are, and how does it inform the activism that you're engaged in?
I kind of think about racism as sort of the engine of colonialism. It's something that allows it to be perpetuated from the past in the present and sadly into the future sometimes. So I think anti-racism work is really vital to my life, to the survival of my whakapapa and their ability to negotiate a world without the same kinds of restraints that perhaps I've had, and that people in my whakapapa from the past have had. I think racism also impacts the ways that I'm gendered as well, and the kinds of social limits and the constraints that are imposed upon being a woman, and the ways that they manifest. So in some ways, when I think about anti-racism work, it's also, for me, it also encompasses that kind of orientation as well. In terms of how I'm impacted by racism, I think it definitely relates to my everyday life as well as my work, because I work in psychology, and I'm quite an advocate for Mātauranga Māori to inform psychological initiatives, and sometimes that can be met with some resistance. So often I'm marginalised in relation to what I'm advocating for. That sometimes means that I'm left out of conversations. Or sometimes it means that I'm hyper visible and I'm kind of in the spotlight, like a bit of a deer in headlights, and not necessarily in a positive way. So it does mean, having to kind of negotiate these really challenging kind of responses to just being me, just doing my job, and actually sharing something that has actually been shared to me with aroha from my whānau, from my hapu, from my community. So it's quite an alienating space to be in sometimes, facing racism in my work context. So it does, and I'm quite I like to think I'm quite an embracing and loving person, but it often puts me on the margins, and I'm often sometimes assumed to be, agitating or hostile when, often I'm really just trying to put forward a very, strong proposition so that I'm not silenced. So those are the challenges I think that racism brings to my activism, and in relation to who I am as a Māori woman who's doing that work as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm muting and unmuting. Thank you. That's interesting. Sissy, do you want to respond to that?
I as a Pākehā woman, I'm thinking a lot about allyship, and this means at times for me I'm very clumsy as I try and speak up and be a good ally. And like I've can think of a couple of examples where I've been, like once I was on a working group and the Māori on the working group said, oh, we were setting up these other working groups, a community working group, and they said, oh, could we have a mana whenua Mata Waka working group, you know, and all the other people quite quickly were saying things like, oh, no, you know, too much, too hard, you know, and I thought at that moment, it's, you know, like I need to do some of the work. And even though I felt quite nervous, I said, actually, I think that this is really important. And, you know, I just said a few things. I don't think I said them that well. I felt a bit hot and sweaty as I said them. And afterwards, the woman came back and said, oh, gee, that was so nice just to have someone else speaking up. It's not just me by myself. And that's how I think of allyship. I don't want to be in the parade. I want to be on the sidelines waving. And I think about my own allyship around being queer. And I think that, you know, like I noticed I was at a conference recently, and the two kind of caucuses, the Maori woman and the queer woman, were finding themselves in like a shared caucus because we, you know, found allyship with each other. But I think that that's the thing, you know, I've got to know that I am part of the system and I have all these privileges and they're invisible to me, because that's what privilege is, eh? It's like this invisible thing. It's common sense bundled up in the way that we do things. It's feeling defensive if things are done outside of your own worldview. And then you've got to work out how you're going to speak up. And I guess when I think about myself and my work and racism, I think a lot about Auckland Pride, where we listened to other voices letting us know that there was a problem here and that there needed to be some solidarity, that it wasn't okay to have this hierarchy of rights, to say, oh, well, it's more important that you're LGBTI and you can celebrate that than it is the fact that a state institution is racist and you're not going to do anything about it because this impacts on our people. So that for me is that moment where you do have to stand up and work in solidarity.
Kia ora. Gosh, I'm with some articulate, awesome woman this morning. I say that because I'm going to stick to my lane, I think, when I talk about racism, and think about, well, two things actually. One thing that Sissy just reminded me of, it's really typical, especially back in because I'm over 50 as well. So, you know, when people used to caucus in different groups, especially back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, you know, they used to say, oh, disabled woman in one group and Māori woman in the other. And it was just like, oh, okay, oh. You know, so I think that because of our intersectionality and because of the racism that is this overlay, the assumptions, you know, that just don't make sense prevail. I think that in terms of the racism and the disability and Māori community, it's the colonial attitudes that, and the colonialism and now my nephew would say it's never unconscious, but the bias that exists all the time around who we are and how we present ourselves. I'm thinking about the fact that as a Māori woman, how do I say this? As a Māori woman, I think that lots of Māori have been colonised around disability, and that is our community's responsibility, but also the fact that we have been colonised from Mairanō around the fact of disabled people needing to be separated from their whānau, and somehow Māori have continued that sort of colonised assumption. So because disability isn't at the forefront, so in lots of Māori communities pre-colonisation and after, you know, disabled Māori were part of the community. from about the when Māori started to move into cities, you know, that's when we started to separate our disabled people, and the assumption was that we needed to be separated, that we weren't as good, that our whānau actually weren't going to do a good job in supporting us in our own homes. So I think that Māori have been colonised around disability, and even in whānau ora, not down here, we're lucky, but in whānau ora, or in Māori communities anyway, in social services, you know, we'll talk about Māori connecting with each other, and if you're disabled Māori, we need to find you a really good service. So, you know, there's a really clear distinction, and we're wanting to break that down, but there's an assumption that if you're Māori, that your disability comes first. And I think that for lots of the people in our whānau ora entity and wider, we are the result is that there's a lot of breakdown between ourselves and our whānau, from thinking about deaf people who haven't had access to their whakapapa or their marae because of the language barrier, literally the language barrier. I'm thinking of, you know, guide dogs and how they're perceived. You know, where do you put your guide dog during a pōwhiri? You know, it's real simple stuff. But also the bigger stuff about, you know, what is our role on the marae? Where do we sit, or do we sit? You know, are we so bundled up with aroha that we actually aren't given a role of leadership? Now that's the Māori community that does that, but I'm really, really, really aware, and I want to be really careful as I say this, I'm really aware that's because of the racism and because of the colonised ideas that have been so pushed and mushed into our being, really. So, you know, we have been taken down the colonial path of assuming that disabled people aren't flesh, and so therefore, you know, yeah, we've been separated. Now, my husband, just really briefly, my husband, he was from Tukumari Bay, but there was no accessible high school, so he needed to go into an institution for high school, well away from his whānau home. Now that's the stuff that happened not so long ago, you know, and he could only go home once a year. So that's because of colonisation and racism. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. The next question that we thought we'd talk about, which I sort of asked last time, but is what does all this mean in terms of activism? So what are you doing about it? How does it inform where you work and how you work, and the passion that you bring to your activism work, all of you?
I guess for me, it means being quite reflective and vigilant around thinking, is this the time where I need to really strongly assert what I have to say? Or is this something that I need to have allies around me to be able to say safely, and to not necessarily be knocked back through the kind of just regularity of privilege and maintaining its own status quo? It also requires times where, for instance, there might be other intersections of identity, you know, to sort of tautoko what you're saying, Ruth, where actually for me it's a time to step back and allow someone else to have that that centre spot to say how it is for them, to say what it, you know, what that means, and then be guided on how to move in relation to that. And so I guess that's how it informs my activism. It's like an emotional intelligence around knowing when is the best, what's the best response for that particular scenario.
And I think for me, again, really simple, but for me, it's about knowing that I need to include everybody, you know, because I suppose, and it's really simple, maybe too simplistic, but as a middle-class Māori woman who's married to Gary, with a disability, I mean, who am I to exclude anyone and not to advocate for anyone else? who is marginalised, or anyone really, because that if I do that, I have, you know, I have less right to be included in a sense. I have to honour the stuff that I talk about. So I just can't. Well, I need to stay in my lane when I do this sort of kōrero. I can't stay in my lane when it comes to making sure that everyone's treated with equality, you know, and that people receive exactly what they need to receive. So I think that's for me, that's the bottom line, that I need to be inclusive of everybody and make that real, because I think that again, I didn't say this, but as middle class, we can intellectualize this stuff, you know, and there's no time to do that. You know, we need to be really clear about what our views are and what our privilege is. I was thinking about this the other day, preparing for this webinar. I have a whānau, so we have this small whānau ora entity where we bring disabled Māori together, and we have a whānau ora navigator. And I know, because of her life experience and because of my middle classness, I think that's what I can say, that that she can connect with whānau that I can't connect with, you know. So she can, so I need to be really humble around that stuff, you know. So it's about sharing that space, knowing who is the right person to speak, and just being really mindful that I need to be really inclusive myself and not make assumptions. And I can make assumptions every day, you know. So I suppose that's what I do in my mahi. I think, who needs to be around the table? Who needs to, yeah, whose voices need to be heard?
I think a lot about being in relationship with myself. Like, I'm thinking about what you're saying about emotional intelligence. It's I need to be able to know who I am in the world and how to back myself. And I notice I have this quite big reaction now to the word inclusive. It doesn't feel the same to me as it did before I got involved in what I guess now will be called the Pride and Police debate, because I think inclusiveness has a context. So I think about intersectionality, and I think about being inclusive, and I think about that in a context. So like I said, I do a lot of community development work. We're talking about perhaps engaging with people in the community. And I want to use intersectionality to say, well, who in this community do we want to put more resource into hearing from? Because we know that some of these voices quite easily mobilise and come around the table. Some of these voices are think that they're actually speaking on behalf of a whole lot of people, but there's been some sort of de facto community relationship happening. And by so sometimes I will listen more to the few, because those few haven't been listened to for so long, that because if we only listened to the majority, we wouldn't really get much change, would we? We would stick with the status quo. So it's this kind of interesting idea around democracy. You know, is it, you know, the 80% is right, or is it that we actually need to be getting much more sophisticated and thinking about where it is that we need to put our resources, and how we can assist with the ability to act throughout, you know, all the people who are involved with us. And I guess that would be my biggest learning would be, you know, yeah, to look at things in the context, not to have sort of blanket rules.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. So you've sort of talked about this, but thinking of moving this into action for people who are thinking about their own activism. So what possibilities and opportunities are created by recognising our own intersectional position, by thinking about those things and others' intersectional positions. And what does this enable in terms of approaches for racism and activism and being engaged in change? Anyone?
Sorry, I was just on mute because my partner's moving things out of a cupboard. I think there are huge opportunities that intersectionality can offer, and doing it properly. And I guess sort of thinking about the origins of intersectionality, you know, as it was sort of created in sort of African American communities, you know, that actually race is really central to intersectionality. And I have heard of sort of some people saying they're doing intersectionality, but there's no mention of the Indigenous people in relation to their intersectionality. So I think when we are talking about intersectionality, it's very kind of deliberately, constructed around race. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunities for people who are engaging intersectional approaches in a kind of decolonial way. Sorry, I'll mute. I might come back in a second. Hang on.
So Ruth, one of the things I've noticed doing readings about intersectionality is that people talk about race and they talk about sexuality and sexual orientation and a number of things, and people do occasionally mention the word ableism, but in nearly every single thing that I read, they actually don't mean that they're looking at ability and disability is completely excluded.
Yep.
So do you want to just talk about that?
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right, Debbie. I thought you were going to ask me a really academic question. I thought, shivers, I can't even reference properly. But no, you're not. Thank you. Look, I just think, I don't know, it's interesting to hear the quarter all round being inclusive. But I just know the practical stuff that needs to happen for us to be recognised as a community. So when people are having a hui, is it accessible? Literally for everybody, you know? Is it welcoming for people with disabilities? And is it welcoming for Māori with disabilities? You know, if we go to Waitangi, where's the accessible toilet? Just really, really basic stuff. So yes, people talk about ableism and they talk about everything. And maybe they don't even mention disabled people in terms of that intersectionality. So we can only contribute intersectionality wise, if that's a word, if we're at the table, and really often we're not, you know. And there are so many of us, I think, that are really skilled. And I don't mean this glibly when I say this, but disabled people are really resilient about self-isolating. You know, we know how to live at home well. We know how to be busy and how to use our whare well, and to how to welcome people into our whare if need be, how to safeguard people if we have people supporting us. We have this skill, but very often we don't get to share that because of the assumptions that other people make about us not being on the radar. You know, so thank you for raising that for us, Debbie. I think it's just about the practical stuff, but the practical stuff lets us be able to contribute and work strategically. You know, I am over 50. I think that's the kōrero for me during this section, and I want younger people to come up the ranks and be able to take over. You know, but that will happen when we get the resources, when all of that good stuff happens, so that we're at the table, you know, so that people we received a referral yesterday into our whānau order service where a Māori woman was showering 3 times a week at her local pool because her bathroom wasn't accessible, and I suspect that was because she was so humble. Now the pools have closed, so she has nowhere to have a shower safely. and her whānau can't cope. So, you know, that's the huge practicality stuff of us being at the table. You know, is her tinana and her caring for all of herself. You know, if we're looking at whare tapawha, that's the whole of herself. So that's the real hard stuff. I want to say shit about being. That's what we need to be at the table. That's what I mean about inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all, Ruth. I think you're bringing up really important ideas. You know, I was thinking about Huhana Hiki actually. I was thinking I've been very lucky to have had her in my ear for several years. So even if she's not at the table, she's at the table, if that makes sense.
She's always at the table. She might be at this one.
So, yeah, I think I was thinking there's a question there about being the chair of Pride and Māori, and I was thinking, you know, volunteers, often people who are volunteering around committees are privileged because they've got the time to do that, you know? So we really saw in Pride that we didn't have a partnership or a relationship with iwi, and we thought rather than asking someone to gift their time, that we'd create a paid position for a takatapui advisor. And they've been working alongside us with the autonomy to set up the kind of advisory board for Māori that they want to set up. And that is about, that is also, I noticed in myself, you know, like allowing, you know, not allow, like even using the word allowing, you know, actually it's not my business. Yeah. And so I have to work a lot on my own self dialogue. I'm the chair, but I'm not allowing anything. This is your thing to do, and you do it in the way that you want to do it, and I will accept that, and I will not challenge that, even in my worldview, if that doesn't make sense. And I think that is number one. Like as Pākehā, I think a lot of the time we don't do that bit. We say, oh, we're really happy to have disabled people or Māori or gay people, as long as they kind of agree with us and they're on, you know, they follow our kaupapa, rather than allowing us, well, when I'm queer, I want to be able to come in and be queer and not have to agree with everyone else's idea of how I should be. And I guess the thing about intersectionality is if it's in your mind as you're doing your analysis of the situation, sometimes those people won't be at the table, and intersectionality will let you know that, will alert you, you'll uncover stuff, and sometimes you might not be able to, you know, bring in one of every kind. But when you look at intersectionality, you know who it is most important to have around the table. Like, do you need 5 cis white gay men around the table, or you know, is that the you know what I mean? So you start making, I think, decisions, and perhaps you do bring into your mind, even if it's not physically, the kinds of voices that you need to hear. And sometimes that's making a phone call or doing some reading, and sometimes that is actually asking someone to leave the chair. You know, can you leave so that someone else has got room? Because that's the other thing I've noticed. People might say, oh, we want more people around the table, but we're not prepared to leave ourselves. And I think that can be a real problem. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got some questions that I think that we'll address now, because you're starting to actually, the questions are feeding into what we're talking about. So one from Courtney. Can any of the panelists recommend ways of addressing some of these intersectional biases without relying on non-dominant groups to do the emotional labour of teaching dominant groups how to move forward intersectionally?
I guess as someone working at a university, I usually direct my colleagues to readings, you know, webinars like this, so that they can do some of their work attending, I guess, some of the treaty training workshops as a space to kind of understand in relation to colonialism. Yeah, that's usually one of my first go-tos. Others might have other suggestions.
I say this carefully, but just hang out with us. If that's a disability community I'm thinking about, or, you know, there's heaps of places where you can, where after a month's time, you can be with us. And I think that for the disability community anyway, I think it's important that people be with us as well as work with us. And for me, that's a huge difference. If you be with us, and I say that to our workers as well, who, you know, pull our undies up and help us with the shower and stuff. If you be with us as well as work with us, you get to see who we are.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Ruth. You know, I was thinking about relationship, you know, this idea that at first you've got to feel positive towards each other, and then you've got to have consistency, and you've got to have vulnerability, and that makes up the triangle. And I think a lot of the time,
I like that.
Yeah, I liked it too. It was from an intimacy thing around friendships. But I think a lot of the time people want to go straight to just having a relationship with you around what I need, a project-based relationship. Oh, we need a disabled person at the table, or we need Māori input, or what would a queer person say about this? And actually, if we think we need to have feel good about each other, feel positive and be vulnerable, and we're in it for the long haul, then you know, our own capacity to generate a new responses is there because we're in relationship with someone. But I guess that's great, isn't it, if you are aware. But if you're an unaware person who maybe, you know, asks, you know, like I guess you would get quite a lot of questions about disability or being Māori, or, you know, like for me, people want to know all sorts of interesting things about being a lesbian. Like, we don't want to have to do that work over and over again. We want people to go off and do their own work. How do we encourage that? You know, this is where we really rely on our allies, to be able to get up and say, well, I mean, I really like that Pakeha Treaty worker model, you know, where we actually have to upskill ourselves and, you know, being able to be a good ally. Like I can be a good ally, you know, we can all be good allies to each other. And I think that that's probably the sort of area that I would be most interested in working in.
Thank you. Another question that's come up. I lost it. So is inclusive close to assimilate in our patriarchal racist world?
I'm not going to answer that one first.
I think there's a great risk that it could be. I think it can be if it's not taken, if intersectionality isn't taken seriously and it's not done well. I mean, sometimes I hear messaging in certain places that I am frequently, and that talks about inclusion and diversity. And I think, oh wow, how lovely for some to say that this is something that we all want and we all have, when, you know, for some it's very much not our reality. And sometimes that kind of messaging can feel really dismissive, invalidating, especially when you are having conversations with people and they just don't want to know, they don't want to listen.
You and I would definitely say that people have this idea sometimes of being inclusive means that you will become more like me. Yeah, I will include you into my world and you will enjoy that. You know, like I always thought being queer was about not being part of the system. And I've noticed now more and more, I think they call it homonormativity, this idea that there are, you know, that the hierarchy of the rights, and how that, you know, queer people being able to be in the military is a success, right? Because you're able to be in the military, but we're not questioning the role that the military has anymore. So I think that, you know, we can lose our own autonomy, our ability to act, by this idea that we have to include everyone and dilute everything down. But at the same time, you know, I don't want to say, let's not try and find ways to have voices that aren't often heard at the table. But yeah, I feel like I've been assimilated a lot of the time. You know, I really reject that. I get, you know, quite like up the system. But I guess you're not allowed to swear here.
So in relation to that, one of the questions is, which I can't see immediately, but so when is it okay to feel angry? When is it okay to express the fact that things aren't okay?
When you're awake. I think you know, you can channel anger really positively. You know, I think that yeah, we can be angry all the time, and all of it all the time. You know, I think this is a bit touchy-feely. My family would laugh at this, but you know, I think we need to feel everything, and I think the connection to intersectionality here is that often we're not allowed to feel everything. But back to the angry stuff, you know, yes, if that's channeled in a good way, and if, yeah, absolutely. But I think for me, the important thing is that maybe not the answer to this question, but often as a certain part of this population that isn't given a mandate, we're not allowed to feel some things. So disabled people are meant to be grateful, you know, happy that someone gives me a shower. Now we pay people really well, but you know, I don't need to feel grateful every morning. You know, I don't need to whip out my gratitude journal to do that. So I think that where the feeling stuff comes in for me, and the importance of that is the ability to express ourselves about who we are. Now, I know that may not be the answer, but I just want to say that stuff because that's important in our world.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. Like I feel like during this whole sometimes people don't want you to be angry because they think that it's going to undo the bigger campaign, or the bigger messaging. You know, like I had so much misogyny from our own LGBTI community, so much really anti-woman stuff being said to me, and I was so effing pissed off about it. And I want to say it out loud, and people are saying to me, "Oh, but no, we'll undo it. We can't, you know, no, this isn't the time." And I'm like, I don't want to be compliant and not speaking up against this, but I don't want to undo my own bigger picture as well. So I think sometimes it's the way that we're angry. That we, you know, like anger's great. Just think about how you're going to express it to not undo your own work, but to further what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're very close to the end and we haven't had time to answer nearly all of the questions. We will get sent the questions, so hopefully there'll be a way for us to respond to them. But just to wrap up, is there something you would all like to say to everyone as we finish?
Yeah, I would say take that extra bit of strength and stand up and speak out, even if it's clumsy, when something's going against your own integrity.
We're not around anyone's table at the moment, but I think it's like thinking about whose voices need to be heard and how do we do that? How do we do that practically? How do we make sure that I mean, not everyone's heard, but the people that need to be heard are heard. And if you're listening to this, you know who needs to be heard. So yeah, kia ora.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about something to sum up, but I think, you know, for me, anti-racism practice is a bit like a dance. It's kind of, you know, like you can be guided by people, you can be guiding, but it's around being in tune with your circumstances, context, the people around you, and the needs that are articulated, being able to listen deeply, which I'm kind of referring to as empathy, empathizing for people who are more marginalized than you, and being able to question your own assumptions and be humble and knowing that we don't necessarily have all the answers. Yeah, being able to say, I don't know, is really important.
Thank you all. Thank you all for participating in our seminar today. It's been really interesting for me, and I hope interesting for all of you. I just wanted to note that we haven't actually talked much about gender, but this is a panel of all women. So thank you all for representing us in different ways. And we look forward to this contributing to the activism and the work that's going on around anti-racism in Aotearoa. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you.